Okay, good evening, everyone. We're about ready to start. I have to get my PowerPoint up though. Do you see the PowerPoint on the screen?
No,
No.
it's the
Okay,
register.
we'll have to get it up there.
There it is, almost.
Is it projected on the screen then?
Oh,
Not for me.
no, sir. There it is.
Okay, let's see.
Yeah.
On the screen now.
Okay.
History of the church.
Yeah. This is 19th class. Current slide and okay. I'm a little confused though.
Well, your left menu showing, that's usually optional if you want it to occupy the full screen page, but normally in a presentation, you're not showing the left menu column slide by slide, and now you're at notes, the prayer.
Okay. It's still not where I wanted, but I think we can begin. Can everyone see the screen with the history of the church?
Yes,
You
Father.
can.
Yes.
Okay. Then let's begin. This is special prayer. A lot of people are very concerned about this trip that Pope Francis is taking to Iraq this weekend. I think it starts on Friday and it goes through Monday. It's dangerous, and yet he is determined to go, not as a matter of his ego, I think, but he really has promised the people, and the people, especially the Christians, have been reeling lately. So I thought it would be good that we pray this prayer. This was made by the Patriarch of Baghdad. So let's say together, Lord our God, grant Pope Francis health and safety to carry out successfully this eagerly awaited visit. Bless his effort to promote dialogue, enhance fraternal reconciliation, build confidence, consolidate peace values and human dignity, especially for us Iraqis who have been through painful events that affected our lives. Lord our Creator, enlighten our hearts with your light to recognize goodness and peace and to realize them. Mother Mary, we entrust Pope Francis's visit to your maternal care, so that the Lord may grant us the grace of living a complete national communion and cooperate fraternally to build a better future for our country and our citizens. Amen.
Father Carmen, did any of the two predecessor popes visit Iraq, or is just the first for a recent?
No, this I think is the first. Pope John Paul II wanted to visit during the Jubilee year, or the year 2000, and he was prohibited. Saddam Hussein, I think, didn't want to bother with it, and so he did his little tour of Iraq at the Vatican. He wanted to go and pray with the places of Abraham. Abraham's original home was in Iraq. Okay, these notes are kind of trite now. We are being recorded. I hope that doesn't inhibit anyone, but you want to know. Our previous classes are all up on our website. The shirts are still available if you're interested. And then we have the program that we're going to start in 2 weeks, the same Wednesday evening at 7 o'clock, the Passion of Christ in John's Gospel. And I think you will find it very enlightening how John has a very unique perspective of the Passion. So there are some overlaps. For example, you have the denial of Peter in both and the betrayal of Judas in both, but there are some very distinctive elements. In John, for example, only in John are there disciples of Jesus at the cross. Actually, it's the beloved disciple and his mother, and then one or either two or three women, depending upon how you read the Greek. But anyway, we're going to look at those different aspects, and I hope that it will be a spiritual experience and not just an intellectual experience. You're welcome to join. Just send me an email so I know that you're interested, and I'll send you the link later next week. Here we are, February 24th, now March 3rd, and we're at the next to the last class. So next week will be our last class. It'll probably be more a summary. I doubt if we'll finish the history of the church in the United States today, but next week we'll finish that and then give a summary, trying to wrap up some of the loose ends that we have. I mentioned that there are certain themes that pervade the history of the church, and I want to connect with some of those themes and show how they, in many cases, they are still important questions. Okay. Now a little bit of review. These are questions, so I'm waiting for you to answer the questions. The first one, what did Gaudium et Spes use to create a dialogue with the world? How did it approach its topics? Was it through logical syllogisms, signs of the times, or drawings?
Signs of the times.
Yeah, signs of the times. Exactly. It talked about what was happening and then comment from the perspective of Scripture, from the perspective of church teaching. Which encyclical followed the fall of communism in Europe? Was it Laborem Exercens, Centesimus Annus, or Populorum Progressio?
Laborem Exercens.
No, Carolina.
Oh, it's not. I thought it was.
Yeah. Laborem
Centesimus Annus.
Exercens was written in 1981. We talked the fall of communism in Europe, 1989. So which of the other two would be around that time?
Centesimus Annus.
Centesimus Annus. Yeah, it's 100 years. 1891, Rerum Novarum. 1991, Pope John Paul II's encyclical on social issues. What is the name of Benedict XVI's encyclical on how to create a more humane economy? Laudato Si, Quadragesimo Anno, or Caritas in Veritate?
Caritas.
Caritas.
There you go, right, Caritas in Veritate. Long, a bit tedious, but well received, some very fine ideas. Which type of Vatican II document is the most important? Is it a decree, a constitution, or a declaration?
Constitution.
Constitution. Constitutions are long. They address many issues, and it says this is what the church is. It's what constitutes the church. So they are the most authoritative. And finally, what is the constitution on the liturgy of Vatican II called? Is it called Lumen Gentium, Gaudium et Spes, or Sacrosanctum Concilium? Anybody remember?
Sacrosanctum Concilium.
There you go. Very good. it begins Sacrosanctum Concilium, nothing to do with liturgy, those words. This is the most sacred council, and it talks about, I mentioned this before, how it gave the objectives of the whole council in this document, which was one of the, I think it was the first document that was approved by all the bishops. So this was done in 1963 at the second year of the council. Okay, very good. A little bit of a perspective of what we want to accomplish today. The history of the Church in the United States begin with the arrival of Columbus in Puerto Rico. Probably, I'm not sure of the dates there, but I think that was in the 15th century, at the end of the 15th century. Of course, he landed on San Salvador at 1492. It includes reports of discrimination and prejudice. We've had some anti-Catholicism in American history. Nevertheless, Catholics have been able to prosper in the United States. This came to a climax with the election of President Kennedy in 1960. After that, Catholics couldn't claim too much the discrimination and prejudice, but there still are problems to face, as we'll see when we get to that part of it. However, the Church in America has seen a decline in membership recently and now faces many challenges. And I want to specifically talk about those challenges as kind of a culmination of our work together in this class. I think many of those questions have an historical significance. Okay. Now we're going back to Vatican Council where we left off. We covered the 4 Constitution, and I want to talk about 3 of the declarations and decrees. This is the Declaration on Religious Liberty. Very significant because it kind of changed the church's outlook on the freedom of religion. Just a little background. What was going on in the United States and what was in a sense criticized by that Americanism, so-called American heresy in 1899 by Pope Leo XIII, here was seen as the model for how people can live together of different faiths. And the recognized author of this document, now, of course, the bishops had their input and other theologians as well, was the great American theologian John Courtney Murray, a Jesuit who was teaching, I think his last professorship was at Yale. But in any case, the significant pronouncements, why was this such an important? Human dignity implies that one has a right and a responsibility to follow one's conscience regarding religion. That no one can be forced to or coerced, pressured into following a certain religion. But it is a matter of conscience. We're just not talking about one's preference or one's the religion that suits the person best. We're talking about this voice of God speaking within the person's mind and telling that person what to do, and that has to be respected. It also makes clear, because it doesn't want to say that, you know, one religion is as good as another. No, not all religions are equal, and obviously the church would say that its religion is, as we saw last week, the fullness of Christ's church subsists in the Catholic Church. So we would say that we have the best religion possible without trying to put down other churches, other religions. We have good reason to say that the Church of Christ subsists in the Catholic Church. But we respect if a person believes that God is calling him or her to Islam, we have to respect that. To Protestantism, we have to respect it. But again, I'm not talking about one's fancy, one's preferences, what God inwardly calls the person. Okay, the second of these declarations that we want to look at is on the relation of the church to non-Christian religions. Nostra aetate, which means in our time. This was begun as a way of making up to the Jewish people for all their suffering in the Second World War. The church wanted to recognize that suffering and indeed to make amends for any part that it played in the suffering. That idea, though, incurred a bit of hostility on the part of the Arab bishops that were suffering because of the presence of the Israeli government in the Middle East. You probably have heard the stories about how Jewish people in Israel expropriate the land of the Arab citizens in that land for centuries. But then they decided to include more than a analysis of what happened in Europe in the Holocaust, and to include an analysis, or if you will, a study of the other religions of the world, and say something about them. And, you know, as all of the documents of Vatican II, it was a very positive report. Major pronouncements: God has chosen, has not revoked his call of Jews as the chosen people. Now, this may sound odd to some people. Some people may claim that, you know, when in sending his son Jesus Christ to the world, God is calling a new people to be the chosen people. These are the this is the church. But St. Paul says it, and we must assent to it, that the Jews are still the chosen people. If you want to say that Christians are the new Israel, the new chosen people, that's fine. But we cannot say that God revoked his call to the Jews to be the chosen people. And then an important point was made, because we still have this bigotry against the Jews. Of course, now we're talking something 55 years ago, the Vatican II, when this was approved and published in 1965. The bigotry against Jews. And some people say, well, the Gospel of Matthew says, if you remember the Passion account in the Gospel of Matthew, his blood be on us and on our children. Jews are said to do that. But the Vatican, this document makes clear that not all Jews in Christ's time, nor any today, are culpable for the death of Jesus. And Christians have to stop completely any kind of insinuation that the Jews today killed Christ, as sometimes it's crudely put. And then the decree on ecumenism. This was actually finished the year before the council ended in 1964. Just to say that, as a background, that non-Catholic churches and ecclesial communions, I want to explain that ecclesial communions, or if you will, communities, were invited to participate in the work of commissions and had presence, but no voice or vote at general sessions. So from the beginning, the Orthodox churches and the Protestant churches were invited, the major ones, not to say everyone, you know, I guess there are thousands of Christian churches, but the major ones were invited to participate in, to attend the general sessions and to even to have some input in the work of the commissions. Although no voice at the general sessions when the bishops come together to discuss the working document, and no vote in the approval of the document. Well, anyway, the Orthodox, they were not very willing to participate at first, but evidently the Russian Patriarch, the Patriarch of Moscow, said he would go or send representatives. And then at the later sessions, 63, 64, other Orthodox churches sent their representatives, and we benefited from this type of open discussion on some of these issues. Significant pronouncements, we have the principles of ecumenism, how we respect one another, how we have to go and know our own tradition well in order to dialogue about it with others. How we have to pray together, but these prayers cannot be a Eucharist, because we don't. The Eucharist implies unity, and there isn't that unity. It would be a false Eucharist if that's what it was. It said that the Eastern Rite, we used to call the Maronite Church, the Melkite Church, we used to call them Eastern Rites, and the Vatican Council, and there was a separate document on the Eastern churches, but it was also relayed in this document, said that these are not just rites, just different ways of celebrating the Mass. These are churches with their own tradition that goes back to Christ in unity with the Pope. So they're not the Orthodox, and they have to be respected as such. Different but equal to the Catholic Church. Of course, under under the purview, we might say, of the Pope. That the Pope is still the leader of the Church, the supervisor, if you will, the sign of unity of all churches, as well as the leader of the Roman Catholic Church, the Bishop of Rome. Okay. It favors prayer and spiritual ecumenism. We can't take the body of Christ together, but we can pray together and pray for this unity. And also it favors cooperation on social projects, especially with the Protestants. And this is the experience in many places in the United States today. There are cooperation for things like a walk, a hunger walk, or maybe building a Habitat for Humanity. You know, they get people together from different faith traditions, and then call for increased study and dialogue. And the dialogues have been effective. They have produced real kind of agreements on these points that were debated and contested for centuries. The document does admit that the differences between the Catholic Church and the Protestant, it calls them ecclesial communities or ecclesial communions, is great, that the differences are many and serious. why they say ecclesial communions or communities and not churches is this. They do not have a valid Eucharist, the Protestants. And so without a Eucharist, they cannot be technically called churches. Now, it's not that we don't want to call, First Baptist Church by that title. We want to say First Baptist Ecclesial Community. But technically, this is the way the church has expressed it in the Vatican Council and then in documents since the Vatican Council. We don't say Presbyterian Church in those official documents, but ecclesial communions. So the Protestants, the differences are many, and what we've experienced in the past 50 years doesn't make it, that makes it a lot harder, huh? Women bishops, especially, is a kind of demarcation which cannot be bridged. With the Orthodox churches, the council said, the council used the phrase from the Acts of the Apostles, let's put no more burden on the people than what is absolutely necessary. And remember in the Acts of the Apostle, for the Greek converts, they didn't have to be circumcised. They only had to help the poor, and I think at that point it did say they should refrain from eating meat, but no, they didn't have to be circumcised. Anyway, the point here is that the Catholic bishops wanted to accept, make it as easy as possible for the Orthodox to come back. Now, would the Orthodox have to accept the infallibility of the Pope? This is an interesting question. I've read Avery Dulles, the preeminent Catholic theologian in the United States for the second half of the last century. He said that these churches or ecclesial communions who did not take part in the councils that approved these questions like infallibility would not have to adhere to those teachings. What we hope that would happen is that the Orthodox would come in, would have a great deal of autonomy, but would accept the overall leadership and the supervision of the Bishop of Rome, and then they could we could have intercommunion. So it was a promising note. Unfortunately, the Orthodox and the Catholics haven't been able to go much farther than that. We have dialogues, but still there hasn't been any break in the a breakthrough so that there would be unity. All right, any questions? Okay, well, we'll continue then. Now, I think it's important that we understand the Vatican Council for what it is and not try to project our own ideas on it. And so I say we should talk about the proper interpretation of Vatican II. Sometimes people talk about the spirit of Vatican II, especially those who are eager to change things in the church, and they say, well, Vatican II started the changing. The changing is a product of the Spirit. The Spirit is with us, so it would be okay to say ordain women. This is, the next step beyond permanent deacons in the that the Vatican II reintroduced, then there would be ordaining women deacons and priests. Well, that's not the spirit of Vatican II was, yes, this great search for truth, but also going back to the, remember we talked about ressourcement, going back to the roots of the church in scripture and in the fathers of the church, and try to adapt what was there at the beginning to modern times, and not just change for change's sake, if you will, or to please different social groups. And I say that the changes were more reforms, going back to how things were at the beginning than they were bringing on new things. It is incorrect to say that the church changed simply to conform herself to the times, or that the church's self-understanding changed completely. No, again, went back to the scriptures for a self-understanding. It did not conform itself to the modern times, contemporary times, so much as go back and examine its origins and try to conform to them. So we have Mass in the, we say vernacular, in the language of the people. That was done at the very beginning. It didn't, eventually Latin was the language of Europe, and it seemed to have value as a language that would be, the Mass would be done in Latin around the world, so we'd have this kind of universality in the sacraments. But we saw a greater value in going back, saw a greater value in having the language of the people, so that the people can participate in the sacramental action, and not just be there, and as it was being awakened by the bell when it was time for consecration. Okay, are there any questions? Are we doing okay? Good. Now we want to talk about the tremendous papacy, pontificate of Pope St. John Paul II. As you know, some people want to call him the Great. And I want to examine that question, but they want to call him the Great not for nothing, that because he accomplished so much, that there's good reason to think of him as a kind of a unique papacy, or at least a one of the greatest papacies, and we'll look at that. So Karol Wojtyla, if I say that wrong, someone can correct me. He was born in 1920 in a little town outside of Krakow called well, he grew up in the city of Wadowice, I guess you say that. The W in Polish, as far as I understand, is pronounced as a V. So Wadowice, and it had a large Jewish population. And John Paul, as a Karol Wojtyla, he befriended. He had a lot of Jewish friends, and that certainly his close relationship with Jews characterized his papacy. Just a few more notes on him, though. He was elected a pope in October of 1978 at 50 years of age, the first non-Italian pope in 450 years. A tremendous kind of breakthrough that we finally, the Catholic Church would have a person from outside of Italy be named its leader. He took the name John Paul, of course, because of his predecessor was John Paul, but also because Pope John and Pope Paul were the two great stimulators of the Vatican Council. Pope John convoked the council, and Paul continued it, Pope Paul VI. And so this gave an indication, first when Pope John Paul I took the name, that there would be continuity, that the all the great results of Vatican II would be followed. And John Paul II, taking that name, indicated the same thing. And it's interesting to note that it's the first time in history where the Pope had a double name. All the other popes had one name, and these fellows decided to take the two names, recognizing their predecessors who were instrumental at the Vatican Council. His mother died when he was a boy. Eventually, his brother died. Karol's father moved with him to Krakow, where he attended the Medieval University, survived the Nazi occupation. During the Nazi occupation, he was a laborer. He worked in a factory and also in a quarry. And then he went to the university and there participated in drama. And all of this has some effect on his papacy, of course. He could write that Laborem Exercens because he knew what it was like to be a worker. He lived among workers for a couple of years. And then his great ability, knowledge of audiences, made him his presence, his actions, very evocative. He was able to move people. He had 2 degrees in theology, one from the Dominican, actually, University in Rome, spiritual theology. He studied St. John's the Cross, spiritual exercises, and then a degree in, say, philosophical theology from a leading university, ancient university in Krakow. I have a hard time saying this name, Jagiellonian University in Krakow. Philosophical theology. He was a very fine philosopher, and also a theologian. And he got it from studying, from working. It doesn't come easy. He was a leading contributor to the commission that wrote the Constitution of the Church in the modern world, Gaudium et Spes. So we can say that he had a proper interpretation of Vatican II because he participated fully in the council. In 1964, he was appointed auxiliary bishop of Krakow. 1967, he was made the Archbishop of Krakow, and of course, from there, 11 years later, was elected Pope. Okay, the second point is pastoral journeys, and this was an incredible feat on the part of this man. He was almost tireless. You know, I get tired of traveling. I suppose I could take 1 or 2 trips a year, but this man took 4 or 5 trips a year. Very exhausting from morning to night activity. He made 104 apostolic journeys. Of course, he was Pope for 27 years, so that's about 4 a year, and visited 129 countries. Certainly many more than any other pope in history. It is said that in the process of these 104 apostolic journeys, he was seen by more people than any other person in the history of the world. And it's easy to see why. You know, he would do a mass and maybe 1 million people would come and see him. And he did this for so many years on so many trips, and he probably was the most visible person in the history of the world. He visited his Polish nation, homeland, 9 times. Very significant visits. I think we've alluded to this before, how his backing of the labor union Solidarity made it a force in the tearing down of the Iron Curtain. Through his support, Poland was able to bring down the communist government in Poland. When I bring it down, they didn't do it forcefully, of course, but they made it that the government had lost its authority, and they had to change. So his support of the Polish movement to freedom is considered key in the breaking up of the Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. His visit to Israel, something unique. He spent time at the Wailing Wall, trying to moderate the great contention between the Jews and the Arabs in Israel. And wherever he went, it's kind of the characteristic gesture he made, was the first time he landed on a country soil, he would bow down, or actually go on his lay down and kiss the ground, a sign of respect for the people, a sign of thanksgiving to God for the earth. One of his greatest initiatives was World Youth Days. He started to call them in the 1980s. At first they were every other year, and now they're every 3 years. But bringing young people together to pray, to evangelize. He made countless numbers of people kind of rekindle their interest in the church, and for that reason, there have been a great many vocations in the Catholic Church around the world. Before him, vocations, some seminaries were just about empty. They were being used for different purposes. But with him in these World Youth Days, they started to be repopulated. Now we still have, as we're going to see, a shortage of priests in the United States, but he did a lot to rekindle vocations. Another of his great initiatives was the celebrations around the Jubilee year of 2000. Jubilee, the year Christ was born 2,000 years later, and he made it a time not just of celebration, but a time of remembrance, and a time of, as we say in Lent, now is the day of salvation, a time of recognizing our sins and repenting of our sins. The great request request of forgiveness that he made to the Jews, to the people who were affected by the Inquisition, to Arab lands, for the Crusades. A couple of the Crusades, if you remember, were bloodbaths because of the Christian soldiers. He asked forgiveness from the peoples today because of those events. Very significant, very moving, and again, raising the esteem of the Catholic Church in many people. Okay, we want to go up. Talk about his teachings. He wrote 14 encyclicals. All of them have a great profundity of thought. None of them, I don't think anyone would say was kind of like a quick treatment. Prodigious in thought, philosophical, a great sense of scripture. He's known to be more of a philosopher, but he had a definite appreciation of scripture. The one encyclical that I know the best is Veritatis Splendor, the splendor of the truth. And he wrote it, he said, the first encyclical that was written with the exclusive theme of a moral theology. He wanted to correct some of the errant ways that Catholic moral theology was going in since the Vatican Council. And he wrote this brilliant encyclical. But one of the highlights of this encyclical was his examination, if you will, exegesis on this kind of studying, taking the meaning out of the encounter of the rich young man with Christ in the Gospel of Matthew. It's just a brilliant understanding of what it means to follow Christ, what it means to, Jesus tells him, do this and you will live. What does it mean to do this and you will live? So he wrote these encyclicals and really made least people in the church rethink. And I know Protestant theologians have comment on his encyclicals too as really insightful documents. Of course, he's famous for his Theology of the Body, which was a compendium of his regular Wednesday afternoon lectures. At Wednesday afternoon, still the custom in Rome, the Pope will give a talk on some topic. And for a year or two, he talked about sex and the body, the theology of the body, and is a coherent kind of appreciation of the human body and of sexuality. So very much of a teacher. Good government interventions. This is another thing. Popes have a kind of a privileged seat. They make their address on, say, New Year's Day or Christmas Day, I think it is, ex urbi, not ex, urbi et orbi, to the city and to the world. And it's usually a slow news day, so they're picked up upon. Certainly, John Paul's interventions were followed by news agencies. So a couple of the important ones, he came out very much as a pacifist. This is, conservative liberals sometimes criticize John Paul. We're going to examine this a bit, but here he took a very liberal position. I was on the streets hoping that the United States would not start the Persian Gulf War, and we could say, well, the Pope is with us on that. And when the United States invaded Iraq, he opposed that movement as well. I mentioned before his asking forgiveness of peoples for the injuries excuse me, I don't want to talk about that yet. So he was a pacifist in the wars. He opposed the dictatorship of Pinochet in Chile, another Pinochet being kind of an ultra-right, and John Paul knew that he did have an authoritarian rule, did persecute people, and he told Pinochet that it was time for him to go. And evidently, Pinochet left office because of that. He was a Catholic and he was obedient to the Pope. And then he opposed apartheid in Africa. He knew that the South African government had this tremendous oppression of the people, and he opposed South Africa, I would say, from the beginning of the movement. Supported the European Union. The European Union, of course, this kind of cooperation among the countries in Europe. This is interesting in that he saw the benefit of this. He pleaded with the European leaders to recognize their Christian heritage, dominant Christian heritage, and something just is so true, you know. But they didn't want to do it, so he was a bit disappointed by that. Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about how he was an example to the world. First of all, example to the world when he went to the prison that had his would-be assassin spoke with him and pardoned him, forgave him. He wanted to tell you that he forgave him. What, you know, how many people have that kind of courage and will to do that? And he really did kind of give example, move other people to be more forgiving. This is personally for me. Maybe some of you remember this. This was about 1986 or 87. John Paul II was coming for his second visit to the United States. He went to San Francisco, and this was in the middle of the AIDS crisis. I mean, we weren't sure whether you could pass AIDS by, fluids from the mouth. And people wanted to stay. Like, we're social distancing now. This was a little bit like, not to 6 feet, but they didn't want to come to touch a person with AIDS. So what does John Paul do in San Francisco? He embraces the AIDS patients that are presented to him. A gesture of courage, a gesture of compassion. That really turned my mind in favor of this man. But there are other examples as well. He called all the religious leaders of the world to Assisi for this day of prayer for peace, bringing them all together, giving them a stage to show their goodwill to one another. And finally, and we see this in the picture here, how he kind of gave old people an example of how to live in the face of death. He never wavered from his commitment to be leader of the church. Now, Benedict XVI chose to retire, and I think Benedict XVI was prudent in doing that. But I also think that Pope St. John Paul II was right, was wise in doing what he did. He gave us an example of how to grow old without feeling a loss of dignity, without feeling ashamed of being old. I remember I was happened to be in Italy in 2004 when this was his last months alive. And on Christmas Day, the television in Italy had a picture of John Paul II just kind of looking at the people, maybe waving a little bit, but telling the people it's okay to be old. You don't lose your dignity. You are loved by God, and of course, you kind of gave this idea that He loves you too, and so you wanted to greet the people on Christmas. An example to the world of how to live as a Christian. Now, there is this question of progressive or conservative. I may confuse some of you, but I know some people on the left are critical, very critical of John Paul II. One author I read says that he took the church back 200 or 300 years, or what he actually says, it'll take the church 200 or 300 years to recover from Pope John Paul II conservatism. And yet, in many ways, he was progressive. He, as I said, pacifist, opposing war, asking forgiveness for the injuries that the church had done through the ages. A request for the I say bicentennial on the notes. Please change that. The bimillennial, jubilee. Cancellation of debt from poor countries. So he also opposed capital punishment. He was strong on abortion, but against abortion, I guess. But he also opposed capital punishment. These are all very progressive causes that he championed. I said about apartheid, another progressive cause in the 80s, 1980s. And he was with the church, but he also was conservative, and it's fair to say he did not go along with many of the changes that people are called for. He certainly adhered to a traditional sexual ethic. He did not give, as a matter of fact, they say he contributed substantially to Pope Paul VI, now St. Paul VI, letter Humanae Vitae. He wrote, the Pope asked for responses from the bishops. Not many responded, but Karol Wojtyła from Krakow did, and saying, that the traditional teaching should be upheld. He did kind of centralize power in Rome. This is a perennial question. Is the how much authority does the local bishop have? Are the local bishops really head of the church, or, as sometimes they're caricatured, are they just branch managers? Well, John Paul II was dictating about how things would be handled in churches. Probably for the better in these times where globalization is just the reality, and it would be very, say, confusing if in one country things are done very differently in the church than they are done in.
Would you give me a little more red wine?
How's that? Okay. And then, of course, probably the biggest criticism he had as a conservative was his really just cutting off all dialogue in the church on the ordination of women. He evidently studied it. We can be sure he prayed about it, and he said, no, it is impossible. It would be a betrayal of the gospel, or at least the tradition from the very beginning, and so no ordination from women. So he definitely was conservative, as indeed a bishop of Rome should be. That's their purpose, in a sense. They have a couple of purposes. One is to bring unity to the church, but also to conserve what has been handed down from the apostles, to see that it is conserved. That's the Pope's job. But he also was a creative in his personal style, huh? So if he was conservative, he was a different kind of conservative. How he would an example, introducing new mysteries of the Rosary. The Rosary, very long-standing. I can't really say ancient. The Rosary was developed in the Middle Ages, the latter Middle Ages, the 11th, 12th, 13th century. But Pope St. John Paul II gave us new mysteries, probably the first time in centuries that was done, to help us to kind of enlarge our meditation. So he was creative in his conservatism. Okay, now this question of, can we call him the Great? Now, there are only two, and sometimes they say perhaps a third pope in history has been called the Great. The two well-substantiated, the great popes, were Pope Leo in the 5th century and Pope Gregory in the 6th century. Men of enormous achievement, and it would seem that John Paul II does approach their achievements. It would be fair to call John Paul II the Great. There is a third pope, as a matter of fact, Nicholas, who was a pope in the 9th century, but he's not universally recognized. So we can say that, yes, there's good reason to think about him as great and to call him that way. But it is not something that the church, is no official title in the church. The Pope St. Leo and St. Gregory have just been recognized through the centuries in this way, and it's possible, we're not going to see it, but it's possible that in future centuries, St. John Paul will also be recognized as the Great. Just another little anecdote about him that is interesting, and maybe reason to say he does have this kind of popular appeal that Porton consider him great. At his funeral, there were between 4 and 5 million pilgrims in Rome. And they couldn't all attend the funeral. I mean, that's an enormous amount of people, but that's the amount of love that people had for this man. And of course, they were chanting all along, Santo subito, Italian. Make him a saint now. Make him a saint now. Okay, so I want to give an assessment here. There can be no doubt that St. John Paul II increased the stature of the Catholic Church in an increasingly secularized world, where the world was leaving the church. He called people back to the church. Particularly important was his role in the breakup of the Soviet Union. It's hard for us Americans to appreciate the misery that the Soviet Union created, the suffering that it did, and he knew it intimately. He lived under communism, and he was able to have a significant role in the overcoming of that evil. He also ended the experimentation within the church. Things like, some of you may remember the 60s. This was actually done. Priests would think that they were celebrating the Eucharist with, rather than bread and wine, with beer and pizza. This is kind of nuttiness that was going on in the 60s, and he was stern. His sternness brought people back in line. He also stopped the great number of priests that were leaving the church leaving the priesthood at that time. He imposed if they're going to leave, they're not going to be given permission to marry, and so priests thought twice before they asked for to be relieved of their ministry so that they could marry again. Took them sometimes years to get that permission. He didn't give it easily, so he was able to stop that. He was strong on orthodoxy, on faith. He curbed some of the more errant ideas on what we believe theology, corrected theology. And he also had a traditional piety, which was very a traditional piety, which people emulated and was very important in the spiritual renewal of the church. So I think we can say that he was conservative, but in the best sense of the word. He was creative. He was a person with a great heart for the people, and is probably the greatest pope in this millennium. I think we can say that. So. Well, excuse me. Well, he was this millennium. This is the third millennium. He was the greatest pope in the second millennium. I don't think that would be unfair. Although we remember Innocent III was a very accomplished man too. No one calls him the great though. Questions about your opinions on Pope John Paul II?
Father Carmen.
Yep.
During his reign, of course, the Universal Catechism of the Catholic Church was issued. First time in centuries there had been one of such of a nature. I've heard attributions to the content attributed a lot to Cardinal Ratzinger at the time, and obviously Pope John Paul II would have had to prove it, but did he, since he was a great theologian in his own right, did he himself contribute to the content? Who's the
who really wrote the catechism for the most part? Ratzinger was kind of oversaw it, but he didn't really contribute. It's Cardinal Schönberg. I know this because he is a Dominican, and he went to Freiburg, where he was, I think, a professor at one time, and it took a couple of years to put it together. And of course, John Paul II approved it. And you're right, though, this was a significant achievement. And not only this, but also the new Code of Canon Law was issued with John Paul II as Pope. They're very significant milestones, documents in the church.
I have a question. I thought, can you hear me okay?
Yes, Cindy.
Okay. I thought that the rosary was around since Dominic.
Well, yes, around Dominic's time. Now, there is no historical evidence that the Blessed Mother, gave the rosary to Dominic. No, I mean, what what historians would call as historical evidence. Of course, not can be a picture in those days, but testimonies by people who are alive, authorities alive at that time. But right, it was in this time. Of course, Dominic lived from 1170 to 1221. That's the time that the rosary started at its origins.
That's what I got, Father. I'm sorry, I was thinking he was in the 800s, so that's what I got confused.
No.
Father?
Yes?
What would you attribute the what do I want to say, the movement or the occurrence? Would it be towards the documents or particular leaders in the popes to what I think has been a dramatic change in our tradition of us having as Catholics small groups and discussions. There have been various movements throughout the years that I've participated in, Lenten and Advent scripture studies. This is a whole new phenomenon compared to pre-Vatican II.
Yes, I suppose that people will want to claim that this is like groups meeting in the early church in homes. Actually, they came together for Eucharist in homes. So there we do have precedents in ancient times. I don't think you can talk about Pope John Paul II as leading this movement. It certainly is part of our contemporary church way of doing things, at least promoting people coming together in small groups, sharing the scriptures, talking about their faith experiences. Unfortunately, I would say they don't seem to last all that long. Maybe in some cases the people continue meeting and they continue talking about the church. I remember this is quite a long time ago, but I was asked to facilitate a meeting of one little group, and someone complained that, well, at least when you're here, we talk about scriptures. Otherwise, it's pretty much of a social gathering. It's easy for it to kind of dissipate into a social meeting when people don't have a great knowledge of, say, scripture or of theology. But in Latin America, of course, is the small group communities were very successful at one time, and some of them, again, are meeting, although I don't think that they are quite the quite as popular as they were, say, 30, 40 years ago.
Could I continue the conversation, Father?
Sure.
I don't know that the idea is that small groups are supposed to last forever. I'm thinking about things like making even just a day retreat or a weekend retreat, or like the seasonal discussions for Advent or Lent, that it builds. I guess the impact I felt is the sense of knowing other people on a spiritual journey. And because I become involved with others and others and others, I feel bound to so many people. And it's not just the passive, we're all sitting in a building at the same time going to Mass, but that we know each other as individuals on a journey coming to work.
Yeah, good. I don't mean to disparage people doing that. I'm just trying to say a little bit of my experience and what I see going around. But if there could be, there's something of great value to it, and the church, we should promote it. That people come together to talk about scripture, to talk about their faith.
It's just such a different experience than like what we're doing right now in learning. We are all passive and we are getting information from you, but I will go from this experience and know nothing about anybody else who's here. And the small group experience, that inviting us to know one another, just seems to me so scripturally based. The people knew about each other's lives, who was healed, who was struggling, even in scripture.
I would say that there are two different kinds of experience. Hopefully this experience is making more knowledge about the church so you can go into your faith community and talk more, say, coherently on different topics, that different challenges that the church has. But yes, I agree with it completely. Yeah. Anyone else, or do you want to say anything more? Okay, well, let's take a final 15 minutes on the topic of the day, which is Catholicism in the United States. And we'll finish this next week and then have a summary of what we've learned. So in the United States, there's a little bit of the early settlements. We actually talked about this when we talked about missions at one point. Our earliest settlements, Catholic settlements in the United States, were by the Spanish. They first came in what is now territorial United States, Puerto Rico, also to Florida, and then through Mexico to Texas, California, and Arizona in the 16th century. I mentioned how the Spanish may have been here. Spanish Catholics may have arrived in the last years of the 15th century. The first permanent settlement of Catholics was in St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. Also important is the presence of the French in the Mississippi Valley, the Great Lakes, and eastern United States, New York. The French Jesuits explored the Mississippi Valley, not Isaac Jones, but Father Marquette, Pierre Marquette, and established settlements along the Mississippi, mostly in 17th century. And then the English in Maryland. Maryland was given as a refuge for Catholics being persecuted in English. It had freedom of religion, and it certainly didn't require everyone living there to be Catholic. And as a matter of fact, as I understand, only 10% of Catholics in colonial, 10% of Marylanders in colonial times were Catholic. Of course, it was from Maryland that there is the only Catholic signer of the Declaration of Independence, Charles Carrollton, and he from Maryland also was the first Catholic bishop in the United States, John Carroll, who was a cousin of Charles. Early Republican times, Catholics at the beginning of the United States were a very small percentage, much less than the percentage of Catholics in Memphis today, where the Catholics in the United States 250 years ago. 25,000 in all of Maryland, Pennsylvania, and New York. Three primary places where Catholics were, just 25,000. So 1 or 2% of the population. There were different attitudes toward Catholic. You remember that all that went on in the religious wars in the Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries couldn't help but being exported here to the United States, this great antagonism among religions. So John Jay, governor of New York, one of the first Supreme Court Chief Justice, he actually proposed a law that would forbid Catholics from voting or from holding land. Pretty extreme. On the other hand, John Adams, the second president of the United States, is said to be the leading donor of the first Catholic church in Boston. So he was a friend of the church. And we know, as we'll see in a minute, George Washington was for the freedom of religion and did not oppose Catholicism. Okay, Catholics are famous. We Catholics in the United States are famous for our education system. It really is quite remarkable. Of course, it's coming apart now for different reasons, but in the 20th century especially, Catholics educated our own, not only gave our children a religious knowledge, but also an excellent education in reading and arithmetic. So the first Catholic parochial school was set up in Philadelphia in 1782. There were colleges, high schools really is what we mean when we say it. The Jesuits in Maryland, after Maryland was founded, Franciscans in New Orleans, when the Spanish were there in the early 18th century, and Georgetown, which is at that time was part of Maryland, Georgetown College was founded in 1751, and University of Notre Dame in not that early, but 1842 was founded by the Holy Cross Fathers from France. There's been a significant amount of prejudice, antipathy against Catholics, and again, this is a product, say an import from Europe. In colonial times, I mentioned how John Jay was against it. There was discrimination throughout the colonies. Even Maryland, for a while, the Catholic Church was forbidden. And it was founded, precisely as a refuge for Catholics. It never had the majority of Catholics, and for a while, being a Catholic was prohibited. George Washington voided any kind of religious test, and we know that Catholics from Europe served decorously in the Revolutionary War. Lafayette was a Catholic. The Pulaski and Kosciuszko from Poland, generals in the Revolutionary Army. John Barry, sometimes called the father of the American Navy, played an important role in the Revolutionary War. A little bit more serious, I would say, was the challenge of the know-nothings in the 1840s and 1850s. Know-nothings because they said if anyone, as a secret society, if anyone asks you about what we stand for, you say you know nothing. So they got that reputation. It was a movement, and then it formed a political party, the Native American Party. It actually ran a candidate, a very prominent candidate for president in 1856. That was Millard Fillmore. Fillmore wasn't elected at that time. He was president previously in, I think, the 1840s. Maybe he was president in 1848, from 1848 to 1852. But in any case, he won 21% of the vote. And so there was some very definite. Now, Abraham Lincoln, president, of course, in 1860, he was, like Washington, completely against prejudice, religious tests, prejudice against Catholics, and I think against other religions as well. What were the people afraid of in the United States? Why did they have this dislike for Catholics? They feared that Catholics would become a significant voting bloc. Now, in the middle of the 1800s, the Catholics started to grow in number because of immigration from Europe. And people were thinking if Catholics all vote alike, they can switch elections, from one party to another if they vote. They would be the significant difference, in other words. And also, there's always fear. This is an interesting concept, and I'm not sure if Catholics are always clear about this, but there is a fear among Protestants that the Catholics had in mind taking over the government and giving it, putting it under papal authority, papal influence. This has always been a fear. And why I say Catholics is sometimes we think of ourselves as Catholics first and Americans second, and maybe that's a fair way to think of ourselves, but we should not think that being a Catholic some way undermines our Americanism. We should think, I believe, and it's my firm belief, that being a faithful Catholic makes us better Americans. Not saying better than anyone else, but better than we were. If we're faithful Catholics, true to our conscience, true to our beliefs, we can be better Americans, more in favor of, say, equal opportunity for all, more in favor of freedom of speech and freedom of religion. I just mentioned, or we talked before about the Vatican document on the freedom of religion. Okay, so then in the middle of the 15th century, this is kind of overlaps the Know Nothing movement. We have the riots throughout many cities. The Irish Catholics especially, they were being discriminated against. They rebelled. There were counter rebellions. People lost their lives. This was a rather unfortunate, but not that uncommon experience in the middle of the 19th century. And one other evidence of religious prejudice is the election of Al Smith in 1928, or the defeat of Al Smith in the election of 1928. He was a Catholic governor of New York. Evidently, the South, which would normally vote Democrat, didn't vote Democrat that year because of the Catholic candidate. South being more Protestant, Smith was not really a gracious loser. He really did complain because he felt, and with a good deal of credibility, that he lost the election because he was a Catholic and not because he was the lesser able of the candidates. Okay, any other notes here? Okay, so Catholic growth in the United States. We can see like three definite surges in the growth of the Catholic population, so that it did become the largest religious, if you will, this is an American term, denomination, church of faith tradition in the country. But three surges, one in the middle of the 18th century with many German and Irish coming to the United States. The Irish, they were having grave hunger, starvation in Ireland, and they came to the United States in large numbers. And then at the turn of the 20th century, maybe for the first 20, 30 years of the 20th century, the last years of the 19th century, Catholics came from Eastern and Southern Europe. Eastern Europe, mostly Polish. Southern Europe, mostly Italians, came in great numbers to increase the Catholic percentage of the population. And then from Latin America, at the end of the 20th and beginning of the 21st century. So in the last, say, 30 years, there's been a great influx of Catholics from Mexico and Central America, especially those countries. So today, 24% of the population of the United States, 1 in 4 almost, people in the United States is Catholic. It's also interesting. This is, in a way, it's disappointing to point out this fact. Not only are 24% of the Catholics in the of the people in the United States Catholic, but 10% of the people in the United States were Catholics but left the church. Some for good reason, I suspect, and maybe others for not so good reasons. But in any case, that's the reality. Okay, it's 8:30. We can begin at the from here. Next week, we'll talk about milestones in the church, in Catholic Church history in the United States, and also some of the institutions that were founded, how they played a big role in the country, as well as the church. So I hope that all of you are doing well, that you have at least hopes of getting your vaccinations soon, so we can come back together and celebrate Mass together, and shake hands with one another. That will be a wonderful experience again. Shall we end with a prayer? Let's pray to the Virgin Mary, again, especially remembering Pope Francis as he goes to Iraq. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen. And may God bless you and keep you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Good night.
Good night. Thank you, Father.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Father.
Father. Have a good night.